Hey guys, it's Dr. Scott Graves with Triune Wellness Center, and today I wanted to talk to you about dermatomyositis. And so for those of you who are familiar with this, I'm not going to get into what exactly it is, but I want to get into how to actually deal with this condition from a Chinese perspective. So I wrote an article a couple of years ago about it because a friend of mine, her sister, had been diagnosed with this, and she said, well, have you ever heard of this particular condition and have you ever treated it? And I said, no, I've never heard of it. So I looked up the symptomology of what it presents, and I knew instantly exactly which two organ systems were involved in Chinese medicine, because Chinese medicine is a medicine of patterns. And we see groups of symptoms and go, okay, well, that symptom is associated with that pattern and that particular organ. And in Chinese medicine, we treat those patterns. So I instantly knew which patterns were involved, and therefore I knew instantly how to treat it from a Chinese medical perspective. Because a lot of times in Western medicine, they don't know what's causing things or what's at the root of the issue. And from a Chinese perspective, we know almost 100% of the time, and we know how to treat the patterns that are involved. So there hasn't been a specific condition that I've run up against in the last 8 years of treating people where I've gone, I don't really know what that is or how to treat it or deal with it. So let's talk about dermatomyositis from a Chinese medical perspective. And I want to separate and just simply talk about the rashes and then, of course, the muscle weakness. So when you have a red or purplish rash showing up on the body anywhere, from a Chinese medical perspective, when something is red, for example, and it shows up on the skin, we very simply know that this is presenting in the body as what we call heat. So in Chinese medicine, there's some very simple principles. One of the principles is the principle of hot and cold. So if something is too hot in the body and redness on the skin is a symptom of too much heat in the body, the very simple principle in Chinese medicine is that you have to cool it down. Now, in Chinese medicine, there is food therapy. We use food because there are some very cold foods that exist within the realm of all foods that are very cold and put out lots of heat in the body. So we use that to help people to cool down. Next, we look to Chinese herbs. So in the Chinese pharmacopoeia, we have tons of herbs that are cool or cold and help to also deal with any kind of expression of heat that we see in the body. Next, with regards to acupuncture, there are some very particular points on the body that release heat from the body. And they've been written about in Chinese medical texts for thousands of years about releasing heat from the body. And then lastly, you can also do other things such as forms of emotional release, which is actually the heart and center of Chinese medicine. That emotions literally are the thing that starts governing our whole entire reality. And that's the most neglected area I see in healing from dermatomyositis today. But the hottest emotion that exists is that of anger. So usually you have to deal with the experiences and the traumas and the things that have showed up for you in the past that have caused you to have different experiences of anger that may be manifesting now into the physicality of the body. And Western medicine is really starting to pick up on this. There's a brilliant book out there. It's really heavy on the medical side of things, but a brilliant book out of there written by Besser van der Kolk, which is called The Body Keeps the Score. And this is a beautifully written book that talks about what Chinese medicine is known for thousands of years, that when you hold on to trauma and negative emotions and experiences from the past, eventually it can manifest into the body because the body really does keep the score. So from the rash side of things, we have to cool the body down. Now, what makes the body hot in the first place? Well, there's very particular things that make the body hot, and I wanted to talk about all of those things. So first is the accumulation of heavy metals and heavy chemicals. When you have a rash, the organ that's involved is the liver. 100% it's the liver. We have to cool the liver down. Interestingly enough, when we look at society today, there's never been a time in history when we've been exposed to so many countless numbers of heavy metals and heavy chemicals. They are everywhere. And the liver has to filter these out. And when the liver has trouble doing this, which it does, the liver has so many problems today dealing with metals and chemicals because they're everywhere that we're exposed to them. Like the average woman puts 140 toxic chemicals on her body first thing in the morning through all the personal care products that she uses. For men, it's an average of 70 different chemicals. And that's just the morning products. We're not talking about food. We're not talking about other things in the environment that we're exposed to. And when you add it all up, you get 10, 15, 20, 30 years of exposure to and collection of these metals and chemicals. And eventually your liver starts giving you signs and symptoms because it can't handle it anymore. So we have to detoxify the body. If you've never done a targeted detoxification before, like one that actually works, then you have to do this. And for people with dermatomyositis, this has to be something that you do for a long period of time because there's such extensive amounts of detoxification that need to take place. The second thing, in addition to heavy metals and heavy chemicals that really affect the liver, is very widespread nutritional deficiencies. So when we look at the average adult and whether they meet the recommended daily amount of vegetable and fruit consumption, only 10% of the population meets the regular recommended daily amount of fruit and vegetable consumption. And when people come into the clinic, I tell them the regular recommended amount won't even be close to sufficient for what you need in order to start healing from this health condition. Because when you're in that condition already, you need a lot more resources than just the regular recommended daily amount. And so I tell people we have to start consuming tons of servings of vegetables and fruits. And on a side note, most vegetables and fruits are on the cold side of things. So if most people aren't consuming these, it's easy to see why people are getting symptoms of heat in the body because they're not consuming the most nutrient-dense, life-giving foods on the planet in order to cool the system down. So you have to eat a lot more vegetables and fruits, and twice as many vegetables as fruits. So those are two big things. Now, from a Western medical perspective, and I know that what I'm going to say next may not be agreed with by a lot of people, but it's just what I've seen in my clinical experience to explain what's going on with people. When you see long-term chronic inflammation, for example, like a long-term chronic rash, there's only two things from a Western perspective that can cause chronic long-term issues like this. It's either a virus or it's a bacteria. And I'm convinced with dermatomyositis that it's both. So when you look at the Western way of treating this, and this is not in any way to knock Western medicine, it's just you run up into the limitations of Western medicine. So I tell people when you start taking your corticosteroids, when you look, for example, at the possible secondary side effects of corticosteroids, there's a laundry list of symptoms. And the reason why is because corticosteroids are really hard on your liver. And it's the very organ that we know we need to work with and deal with and support in order for you to heal. So in the short run, they definitely help to clear up rashes and whatnot. People see that all the time. But in the long run, they cause way more problems and way more secondary side effects. So I'm not a huge fan of that. Also, with something like methotrexate and some of the other medications, excuse me, like you have to take a look at this and say, okay, are Western prescribed drugs or the corticosteroids ever going to chelate or take out heavy metals and heavy chemicals from the body that are burdening the liver? No. Are the drugs ever going to deal with widespread massive nutritional deficiencies? No. Are they going to properly detoxify the body? No. So all of the drugs, while they may be, necessary in the short run for people to get some kind of a relief, and I'm not saying I'm against them, they're just never ever going to take care of the root cause of the problem. And not only that, but if it is bacterial, usually the only weapon that Western medicine has against that are antibiotics. And antibiotics are very good in life-threatening situations, but antibiotics have a whole slew of secondary side effects as well. People think that if they take antibiotics that there's no side effects from them. There's huge, catastrophic things that antibiotics can cause in the long run, because antibiotics just destroy everything in the digestive system. They're antibiotic, they're anti-life. And so when we look at that, do they work to help dealing with bacteria and life-threatening situations? Sure, of course they do, but they're not going to really support the system in the long run. And also, when we look at that, like from Western medicine, from a viral standpoint, there are some viral drugs out there, but to be honest with you, I think what we find in nature is much more suited to help work in harmony with the body. So there's tons of secondary side effects that people can have, and they do have when they're going through this. But when you look at Chinese medicine, naturopathic medicine, functional medicine, when people take herbs and supplements, and Chinese medicine is all about working in harmony with the body, then I rarely, if ever, see people having side effects from, supplements and whole food, things that we give people, because these things work in harmony with the body. So that is with regards to the rashes. Now, with the muscle weakness falls into affecting the spleen, or the spleen pancreas from a Chinese standpoint. And when you look at the spleen pancreas, and they see them as one organ in Chinese medicine because they share the same nerve supply and the same blood supply. They're your organs of digestion from a Chinese perspective. And you say, well, what in the world does muscle weakness have to do with digestion? Well, the pancreas emits enzymes to help break down your food so that your body can use those materials for all kinds of different things. Now, the pancreas also emits insulin. And if you're having some kind of a difficulty either with the absorption of sugar or with the with how insulin is interacting with the cell to push it into the cell. So basically, insulin helps each individual cell to digest sugar so that it can use it for energy and also support it not feeling, the muscles not feeling weak, right? So we know that there is disruption with the spleen from a, from a Chinese perspective. Now, what are all the foods that cause heat and damage both the liver and the spleen from a Chinese perspective? Well, any and all forms of dairy, including yogurt, cow's milk, cottage cheese, all of these things are super damaging for the liver and the digestive system. All forms of genetically modified food, so that means all forms of wheat, so breads, pastas, cereals, cookies, pastries, genetically modified corn, genetically modified soy, and genetically modified canola oil, which is a lot of your fried food. Also, pork, eggs, alcohol are also some big contributors, and of course, refined sugar. So if you have dermatomyositis and you're consuming these foods, they are absolute no-nos because these foods create substantial amounts of heat and inflammation, and that inflammation fuels viral and bacterial issues that show up in the body. So you have to not consume those things if you ever want to have a fighting chance at healing. So we've got the liver and the spleen. Now, from an emotional perspective, when you look at the emotion, the negative emotions which affect the digestive organs more than anything else, it's worrying and overthinking, and also low self-esteem. So like carrying a fear that you think you're not good enough. And with everybody that I've worked with who has dermatomyositis, there is a significant amount of memories from the past, trauma, where the fear of not being good enough has showed up. And also when you simply look at weakness, if you have the dermatomyositis where muscle weakness is showing up, you have to ask the larger question in terms of saying to yourself, well, where is it in my life do I feel weak? Or do I feel like I have this weakness with all of my life. I just don't feel like I have very much power to change my circumstances, power to do anything about what's going on to me, power to change things. I've seen that show up significantly with people who struggled with this as well. And then on the liver side of things, we're looking at anything within the family of anger. So the mild forms of anger, including feeling bothered, annoyed, irritated, and the extreme forms of anger, which would be feeling livid, fury, rage, resentment. So you have to look at all memories that involve those extreme forms of anger that are showing up too. And the tool that I use in the clinic to help people to release and let go of their emotions is either emotional freedom techniques or tapping and the Sedona method. These two things, I have seen people release all kinds of emotions and literally start recovering or recapturing the freedom that they can feel when they do surrender and set these things free. So these are all the things that we would do in the clinic to help people to heal from dermatomyositis. So you hear from a Western perspective, there's no cure, you can't heal. Well, Chinese medicine is about balance, and we really do believe that almost anything can be balanced in the body. So if there's too much heat and there's weakness, we got to make the body strong, and we've got to deal with the heat that is in the body. So if you have found this information to be interesting and you just really resonate with this information, I would definitely love to work with you. I have worked with a lot of people that have this condition, and people definitely have seen tons of progress. So I work with people either in the clinic, you can come to see me, or I do phone consultations with people to set up the structures that I've talked about in this video in order to help people to heal. And it doesn't matter if you're taking the Western prescribed drugs. All of the things that I do suggest in this video for people are things that you can do simultaneously alongside of Western medical treatment. So, and then as far as the emotional processing is concerned, that can definitely be done over the phone as well. And anyway, if you have liked this video, please like the video on YouTube, share it with your family or friends or with anybody that you know who has this condition, and of course subscribe to our channel. But I'm grateful you've watched the video to this period in time, and I really do hope it was beneficial and helpful for you and has given you hope. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me and set something up. Hope you have a great day, and thanks again.